Welcome to this week's episode of the
We Got It
podcast. The We Got It podcast is an official podcast of Spartans Illustrated, which is really kind of your hub for all things Spartan athletics. There is still stuff going on in the transfer portal with a big land for the Spartans this week, so make sure you head over to Spartans Illustrated to check all of that out. It's also where you can find all of our previous episodes links to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. So however you want to listen or watch, it's there for you. Welcome to the We Got It podcast,
a Michigan State sports podcast for everyone.
We're Jonah and Abby, a husband and wife who's probably a little too obsessed with Spartan sports.
And we want to share a little bit of that obsession with you, from casual fans
to die-hard bleed green fanatics.
And we want to make following Spartan sports easy, enjoyable, and engaging for everyone.
Go green!
Abby, we are here to talk about not just one Spartan victory this week, but two Spartan victories on the week. Michigan State is now 5-0 in Big 10 play here in January, but a lot to like this week, coming off wins against Washington and at Northwestern.
Definitely. And I think I just assumed and hoped that the Washington win would just be in the bag. Like, if we didn't take home the win, I was going to have some serious concerns. Northwestern just always makes me a little scared, and I don't know if it's the ghost of Boo Booey just haunting my mind to this day. I did not believe it. I was just waiting in that Northwestern game for him to somehow emerge. I'm not kidding. Somehow emerge on the court at halftime with some loophole discovery of another year of eligibility, and he was just going to come out and start draining half court shots. Thank goodness that did not happen.
The curse of Boo Booey is no more, and Michigan State was able to take care of business at Welsh Ryan Arena against the Wildcats, and really was a solid win for the Spartans. Obviously, maybe a little bit sloppier to kind of end the second half, but I will always say this, that I will never, ever, ever feel bad about a road victory in the Big Ten. No. Especially this year when you have probably 9, 10, 11 teams that could probably be in the tournament.
Absolutely.
You take these wins and you say, yep, that's a win, and you move on to the next game.
Definitely. And I know Tom and all the coaching staff are going to nitpick at things far more than we will, but as fan podcasters, like you said, absolutely always take a win on the road. And even if those last 10 minutes looked a little less polished than the first half, that first half performance was pretty remarkable. And too, we still ended up with a 10-point victory in Illinois. I will take that. Absolutely.
Right. I was joking in our family chat during the game that we played well enough to get the road win, but bad enough where Izzo is still going to be lighting that fire under the bellies of the players to kind of
perfect kind of victory.
Keep them hungry, keep them striving to improve. But like you said, they really got off to a really fast start against the Wildcats to kind of make this game, even though it was maybe sloppier the second half, never really a sweat throughout. But
everybody has their fingernails intact after that one, hopefully.
It really started with the play of Jeremy Fears Jr. In that game for the Spartans.
Definitely. Him and Zapala both, I feel like, came out explosive in this game. And I think that's kind of been just a theme lately, especially for Fears. I mean, he's just had an incredible week. And a big part of that is just his ability to command the floor, to see his offense, to push the ball to people who are going to make plays. I mean, the kid has 18 assists on the week across 2 games. Mm-hmm. That's insane to me.
And not only does he have 18 assists, he only has 2 turnovers.
No way.
So that's a 9-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which is an elite number.
Okay, so what's a good assist to turnover ratio? Because I have no context for that.
I would say that if your point guard has a 5 to 6 turnover ratio, that's pretty solid. But 9 is elite
I love that.
Levels, and he's just seeming to find another gear, which just for Spartan fans everywhere, for Tom Izzo and his coaching staff, this is such a promising sign.
Been begging for this type. I think especially with the type of basketball that Tom Izzo plays, where it's fast-paced. You're constantly pushing your offense. We're constantly pushing those fast break plays. We have been looking for a point guard who has that kind of leadership, that ability to visualize the court, to know where his guys are. I think at one point in the game against Northwestern, he almost kind of got a fast break down the court, but then had a couple of defenders catch up and collapse on him. I don't know if he has eyes in the back of his head. Like, I don't know what happened, but he somehow knew that he had, I think, Trey Holloman, yeah, right behind him. Like, right at the last minute, flips the ball back to Trey, who comes flying in. Nobody sees him for this beautiful layup. And I think if he had tried to go for it, yeah, maybe he would have drawn the contact. I think he would have had a really hard time making the bucket. And instead, he's giving up, right? Like hey, I could force this and maybe get a bucket under my stat line. He's seeing somehow Trey behind him. And that's just like how he's been all week. And really, I think he's been ramping up to this all season.
And he's not even just like the motor that kind of gets this offense running. Like, his defense also this year has been elite. Going back to that Ohio State game where he really just shut down Bruce Thornton.
Yes.
On Sunday versus Northwestern, he has a couple steals. He causes a couple charges. And those are just plays that you see over and over again from Fears. And like I said, if he can continue to kind of notch the level up of his play, like, that's what you need come March, is you need that point guard that you can count on to shut down their best player, their best perimeter player, but then also just facilitate this offense, take care of the ball, make things happen. And that's what we're seeing out of Jeremy Fears.
Well, and I think one more thing I want to say about Jeremy too is that I think all season he's been pretty consistent on defense. He's been consistently getting a decent amount of assists, but I think one area was like, I was really hoping to see more point production from him of like, yes, he's a great leader on the floor. We're seeing him make things happen for other players, but you also need your point guard to score some points. And he did that this week. Absolutely. He had a double-double against Washington and then put up another 12 points against Northwestern on the game on Sunday. And so, yeah, just really impressed by him. And one thing that I was thinking about, we've talked about this with Jackson Kohler, of really reflecting on just seeing his level of aggression, his grit, his speed, even compared to last year, like how much his injury was hindering him. And I think he was even asked about that in a recent post game of like, why do you think that you're playing so much differently and doing so well? And he goes, I'm healthy. And so I think about that for Jeremy too. And just so much, like, maybe this is going to sound like hippy dippy or whatever, but I would really think like that anniversary of having a very traumatic injury occur, like that just passed a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas. I really think like mentally, even your body like remembers a lot of that. And I'm wondering, just even having to like enter really the basketball season with that anniversary of that shooting looming, and then now kind of being on the other side of that, I just think that might be like freeing him up a little bit. Maybe I'm way off base with that, but I think it's just been really cool to see, like you said, it seems like he's just like unlocking another level and just powering up every game we see him in. And I hope that continues for him.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like he has that confidence in himself and his body to make these plays, where I know you've talked about kind of earlier in the season when he drives to the basket. It seemed like he was maybe a little hesitant, didn't know exactly what to do, if he was going to shoot or dish the ball. But now he just seems to be so decisive in all those plays where he's not missing a beat. He's not kind of catching himself. He's just being confident, making those plays and making the right plays.
And how much of that is just confidence in his own body, knowing that his leg is stronger, knowing that he can actually make those sort of basketball plays, and just like building that trust in the fact that like he can do those things and do them safely and do them well. So I think obviously Jeremy Fears is our player of the week. I think it's pretty much implied. That's just how much we're gushing about him.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great pick.
Right. Moving on, obviously Fears had a really great week for the Spartans. A guy on Sunday that he just continues to kind of have this quiet presence, super efficient, but freshman Jace Richardson.
Yes.
He just makes all the plays.
He floats. At one point, he quite literally in the second half dribbled circles around one of his defenders and got a layup. Like, he is just so smooth. And I think the reason we don't shut up about this is because you don't see that in freshmen. You maybe have like these massive, 1-year players who come into college, like your Jaren Jackson Juniors or your Zion Williamses, right? Like these just like massive center or forward players who have so much height. They're so athletic, they're one and dones. But to see that out of a small guard who his ball control skills is unreal.
Ball control and body control.
Yes. Which I think is the bigger thing for a freshman, because out of your body control feeds your ball control. And I think that's something that a lot of those like big 1-year players can kind of get away with not having perfected just because they're so big or they're so athletic or they're so tall. But as a small, guard, you have to be able to control those things, because otherwise you're getting constantly in positions where you're going to get turnovers forced on you. And we just don't see that from him.
Right.
He handles things so well.
I think just he consistently has double-digit outings on 4 or 5 shots. I really think what's coming is once we get to March, once we get down the stretch, either in February or the Big Ten tournament or the March Madness, like he's going to have a game where he kind of explodes.
Yes. Oh,
where
I think so.
He finally gets that 10, 12 shots, scores 20-plus points, and really carries the Spartans to a victory. Like, he just seems like this kind of sleeping giant where you have
100%.
this weapon who is so efficient, shooting excellent from behind the arc. When he gets to the basket, he just makes some tough, contested looks, knows how to contort his body in order to get the ball up to the basket. Yeah. And it's just like such an awesome weapon to have on your bench, to not have to. There's so much talent around him where they don't have to rely on him to score 15, 16, 18 points a game. He can just come off the bench, have confidence, let the game come to him, and get his 10 to 12 points a game.
And here's the thing about this team. We've talked so much about the depth, but when you actually apply, what does that look like to have depth? It's not just that you have capable bodies. It's that when your starters go out, you're not biting your nails the whole time, right? It's like the depth is there that when Trey Holloman goes out and Jace comes in, I'm like, sweet, we got another weapon on the court. Trey gets to take a breath and Jace gets to come in and perform well. Like, I think that's what we really mean when we're talking about how deep the Spartans are and how much that is going to help in an ever-increasing physicality of the sport, especially in Big Ten play. Like, unfortunately, injuries are probably inevitable. So, even from that perspective, it's a huge boon. But just, I think having that confidence that it's like, oh, wow, we're not getting like a downgrade because our starter went out.
Right.
It's
Overall,
just a different look.
Just an excellent week for the Spartans.
I mean, hold on. Before we move on, though, like just absolute domination against Washington. I mean, I almost feel bad for them. I think the announcers at the end of the game were like, welcome to the Big Ten, boys, which you can't really put it any better than that. It was so awesome to see Alumni is own, those guys just losing it against a Washington team and really showing them, hey, this is what it's like in the Midwest and the East Coast. Like, you better buckle up.
Absolutely. Getting up to a 16-1 lead. I think Washington didn't score their first field goal until like 9 minutes and 30 seconds in the first half. I think kind of a crazy stat. You have Nick Sanders having more field goals than Mr. 2 million NIL Great Osabar for Washington. It was 0 for 8. That's what kind of game it was.
I did not realize that.
Yes.
Wow. Ooh, sorry, great. That's not a great stat.
Utter dominance.
Yeah.
And this offense continues just to click at a high level in conference play so far.
And speaking of which, the offense clicking, in the Northwestern game, you had 10 different players with points in the first half.
Yeah, in the first half.
Not the game, the first half. Like, the production on this team is wild. And, a lot of times it's not just one player going off for 25 points. But I don't care. When you have 10 guys contributing to the score, of course.
Right.
I do want to shout out and Jeremy Dewar. He has been posting since the beginning of the season that when the Spartans win, this kind of idea of like this race to 69. And I believe now the Spartans, I want to say, are 12-0.
Yep.
12-0 when they beat the other team to the score of 69. It's like this, just such a fun thing, and it's kind of started this like community trend on Blue Sky and Twitter of like everybody waiting for when Jer Bear on Twitter is going to post like Spartans win the race to 69, and it's so fun every time.
When MSU had 67 points, I literally had my phone up on his profile. That. And as soon as I got 69, I was just refreshing until the tweet so I could repost it immediately.
It was so funny against the Washington game because he was, I don't know, somewhere where he like wasn't able to get access to his phone when the 69 happened. I think somebody even like tweeted at him and was like, "Are you okay? Oh, yeah. Like, what's happening? I'm waiting for this."
So the day that happens where he doesn't send that tweet.
Yeah, somebody check on him.
You need to check on him, Jeremy, to make sure he's okay.
I love it. Man, what a fun week for Spartan basketball. I feel like a little nervous because every time we come on the podcast, it's been a great week for Spartan basketball.
I will say, back on December 9th.
Oh, dear. We're going there?
We're going there.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you were going to wait or not.
We had the Matt Sheehan on the podcast.
The Matt Sheehan.
And we were giving him some hot takes.
Yeah, playing a little hot or not.
And one of the takes...
Which, if you haven't listened, great episode. Please go back and listen to it.
But I had a take for Matt that I thought Michigan State would be 15-2 going into the home game against Illinois.
And what was our current record at the point?
I want to say
7-2 or 9-2.
It was single digits wins for sure. It was early December. So we've had 3 conference games since then, 4 or 5 non-conference games. Currently, your Spartans are 14-2 with a home game standing in the way on Wednesday against one of the bottom teams in the Big Ten to be 15-2. And I know, like, Matt kind of agreed with us, but he was saying it's kind of a hot take.
Yeah, it's a little spicy. He agreed with it, but he said it was spicy.
But I think that Michigan State's now going to be pretty highly favored to be 15-2 going into a really big game against Illinois on Sunday.
And I think that Ohio State game was the linchpin for that prediction. I think because we won that Ohio State game, it's propelling us into heading into that Illinois game. And, you know, I was feeling pretty worried about Illinois. I'm still not feeling comfortable about Illinois. But they just majorly struggled against USC, who we were, I mean, really not painting a pretty picture for last week when we were doing our little, like, welcome to the Big Ten intro. At home. It's one thing, I feel like, to lose to USC, like traveling out to the West Coast, having to deal with the time change, all that. And, you know, they beat Oregon by a significant margin. They've been doing really well this season. But I'm feeling like it's a little bit more doable.
Right. And they lost to Northwestern at Northwestern as well.
Really?
Yeah. So definitely, I still think Illinois is top 3 or 4 Big Ten team.
For sure.
But in a year where there's not a true elite or like clear number 1, top 5 team in the Big Ten, like that's a big opportunity for Michigan State to get a signature win.
Absolutely.
To kind of improve their seeding. I think right now they kind of sit like at a 4 line. But getting
You're
a win,
talking about for the Big Ten tournament or for the NCAA?
For the NCAA tournament.
Okay.
And I think getting a win, obviously, we got to take care of business against Penn State.
Yes.
But if they can go after this week, this upcoming week, 2-0, I think that kind of bumps them probably to a 3 seed line, which I think any Spartan fan would be thrilled about after really sweating Selection Sunday the last 3 or 4 years.
So sweaty. I don't want to have to deal with that again. I even switched my weekend. I don't know why I did this. I switched my weekends at work so that I could watch the Big Ten tournament. But now I just realized that I'm going to have to sit through Selection Sunday. But maybe it's actually going to be a blessing.
It is. I think it's going to be a blessing.
I'm going to hold on to that. And I'm going to say that it was a good decision for me to switch my work weekend. Well, another wonderful week for Spartan basketball. We are going to kind of wrap up the episode, get you caught up on all the other Spartan sports that are happening. There's a lot going on in the winter. Absolutely. And then we've got a fun, quick little We Got It Covered segment for you. So please don't go anywhere. Well, it's now time for halftime. So I'm going to turn you over to our analysts to cover what's been going on with hockey this week.
Yeah, so busy week across Spartan athletics, starting with hockey. Number 1, Michigan State Spartans traveled to Penn State this weekend for a weekend series. On Friday night, it was kind of a crazy game, high scoring. The Spartans got off to a 2-0 deficit against the Nittany Lions and then came back to tie it 2-2. Penn State got a 3-2 lead And then after that, the Spartans scored 4 out of the last 5 goals to come away with a 6-4 victory. Started off the weekend on a high note. And then on Saturday, kind of a different story where there was 10 total goals in that Friday night game, only 4 goals on Saturday night.
It's so interesting how the same teams can have such different scoring differentials, even from game to game.
Lots of changes, lots of adjustments happening. But again, Penn State got off to an early lead, 1-0. The Spartans then scored 2 straight, and then Penn State unfortunately got the equalizer late in the third period to send this game to overtime. And unfortunately, although Michigan State got a point for getting it into overtime, Penn State ended up getting the additional point by winning the shootout. So overall, got a win on Friday night, got a point on Saturday. So overall, I'd say a positive showing for the Spartans. They are in first place right now in the Big Ten. I think they'll probably still be number 1 heading into the rankings that come out tomorrow. But overall, a solid weekend for the Spartans.
Absolutely. It was a little bit of a mixed bag for the women's basketball team this week. They started off with a road game against Nebraska where they ended up taking the tally in the loss column with a 85-80 defeat in Nebraska. But again, Big Ten on the road, always going to be challenging. The girls rallied. They managed to pull out a win against Washington on Sunday at home, winning 80-68, I believe.
Yeah. Welcome to the Big Ten, Washington. Take 2 L's this week.
I know. I was looking at that. I was like, it was a rough week for Washington. But, Lady Spartans continue to just keep chugging along this season. They're still making great progress. They're 2-2 in the Big Ten and a lot more of the season ahead of them for sure.
Absolutely. Want to update you guys on the football team a little bit.
Yes.
Got some transfer portal news. Been quiet the last couple weeks with the holidays, but the winter portal cycle is now wrapped up, and the Spartans got 2 pretty big commits this week.
Absolutely, they did.
Starting off earlier in the week, they got a kind of surprise off the radar commit from wide receiver Rodney Bullard. And Rodney Bullard is a wide receiver come from D2 Valdosta State, but he's the guy that has had a ton of production.
Yes.
Playing at that level, I think over 2,000 career all-purpose yards. I think he's had 12 or 13 career touchdowns. An excellent kick returner, averaged about 25 yards a return.
Which we desperately need.
And a touchdown. So Michigan State has really shaken up this wide receiving room and gotten a lot of production, a lot of guys.
Very different.
It's going to look very different after some of those portal losses. It was kind of looking like
I was feeling nervous.
Will Smith in the Fresh Prince gif where he's kind of just looking around in the room by himself. But reinforcements are on their way to East Lansing. Actually, they're on campus right now. Jonathan Smith posted a picture of all the early enrolling freshmen and transfer portals in the football building today.
Classes start tomorrow.
Yeah, classes start tomorrow. So they've gotten, I believe, 16 now transfer commits, but none bigger probably than Connor Moore, left tackle or right tackle, kind of TBD.
Desperately needed.
Out of Montana State. So another FCS program. So still D1, but Connor Moore has been an absolute monster at the FCS level. He was an all-freshman, all-American his first year, and then last year was an all-American at the FCS level, has over 900 career snaps. I think last year only allowed
huge
1 QB sack and 11 QB pressures.
Which is wild. Absolutely wild.
Right.
And what we desperately need from our offensive line after this year.
Absolutely. I was doing a little bit of research on him, and he was getting some NFL talk during the season at the FCS level before he's even making that jump to the FBS. So a lot to like out of Connor Moore. They kind of put out all the stops for him. He visited this weekend. He was at the Washington game. He was actually supposed to visit
this is my favorite part,
Ohio State yesterday, but instead he opted to kind of extend his visit, go out to breakfast with the football staff, and ended up committing on Saturday for the Spartans, which was probably, in my opinion, need number 1 in this transfer cycle was a starting caliber tackle, and they got this in Connor Moore. And now, again, kind of similar to the wide receiving room, this offensive line is going to look a lot different.
Yes.
This upcoming year, hopefully giving more room for those running backs, more time for Aiden Childs, which is just huge. This was a weak point in this team. And with these 2 additions, this offense is going to be looking a lot different.
Yes.
Last year, a lot of new faces, but I think a lot of upgrades overall in these additions.
Definitely. I think the MSU coaching staff really made us sweat it out on that
For
one,
that tackle.
especially with classes literally starting today on Monday and him committing on Saturday. But you know what I think sealed the deal? They were really trying to get him there in time for the Washington game on Thursday night. I think his flight arrived like right at the beginning of the game. They got him up by halftime. But David Harns of Spartans Illustrated, if you go to his page on Twitter, you got to watch the video because it will, no pun intended, pun intended, it will melt your heart. The kid is sitting in the bleachers and you can see that he's eating a melting moment sandwich, which if you've been listening to our podcast for a little while, you know, the OGs will know our love for the melting moment sandwich.
Melting moments, sponsor us.
Yeah, we would love that. He's sitting in the bleachers and you see him, you know, just unwrap a sandwich, take a bite. And then he does like a double take at the wrapper of the sandwich, like, holy crap, that's a good ice cream.
Connor Moore is all of us eating a Melting Moments ice cream bar.
So I think that, and I agree with David Hards, I think he said it first. I think that was the melting moment that secured him for the Spartans.
Forget probably surefire starting role. Forget any kind of NIL compensation.
Just give him
melting
all the
moments was definitely the thing that sealed the deal for the Spartans.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, we can't wrap up halftime without giving you a little update about another Spartan athletic department. The women's gymnastics team is off to a really strong start this season. They won their opening match against Western Michigan, and then they just traveled down to Florida for a little quad meet against Florida, Northern Illinois, and Nebraska, and they came away with the win against Northern Illinois and Nebraska. Unfortunately did fall to Florida, but they're sitting at number 3 in the country, and they are set to come home, face off against rivals University of Michigan at home on Friday. It's streaming on Big 10 Plus, so you should totally tune in. These girls are just so wildly talented. And I'm excited to see them walk away with the win from Michigan.
If you don't have BTM Plus, they have moved that meet from Jennison Fieldhouse to the Breslin Center to fit more fans. So get your butt in the stands for a big meet, Michigan State versus Michigan. Be a good week. But how about MSU Athletics right now? You got the number 1 hockey team in the country, the number 16 basketball team, which when you're listening to this, they're probably going to be higher. Got the number 20 women's basketball team, number 3 women's gymnastics team.
Just
transfer portal is going well, so what a time to be a Spartan.
Well, for those of you who are not familiar with the podcast or maybe haven't stuck around to the end of some of our episodes, you know, we like to throw this segment in different spots to keep you on your toes a little bit. But every week we try to throw in a segment called the We Got It Covered segment of really helping you feel like you've got it covered when it comes to Spartan sports and just like sports in general. There are just like weird terms and weird rules that if you haven't, you know, been watching a sport for a long time, like us, like we're getting into hockey a little bit more. There's so many terms when it comes to hockey that I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So if you're a new football or basketball fan, that's a lot of times what we focus on because that's what we know the most. We're here to help you feel like you can kind of like understand what's going on, whether it's, you know, like a weird penalty in football or a certain term when it comes to basketball. And so today I'm going to be asking Jonah about a couple specific like odd basketball terms and just asking you to break it down a little bit for us. So let's first start with like, I hear people talk all the time about like setting a screen, setting a pick and roll, like an illegal screen, a moving screen, all the different things. Are those the same thing? Are they not the same thing? Tell us what's happening with that whole situation.
Yeah. So screen and a pick are essentially the same thing.
Okay.
They can be used interchangeably a lot. I think the most simple way to understand is a pick is a way to screen a defender.
Okay.
So like maybe screen is macro, pick is micro. We're going deep in the weeds.
I was thinking very like English grammar of like one is a noun and one is a verb.
But essentially on the broadcast when you're watching the game, when you're talking about if you hear those terms, They're interchangeable. They're the same
And so
thing.
this is something that a player is doing on offense to essentially screen or like hang up the defender that is on another player. So if you've got Jeremy Fears at the top of the key, he's trying to make something happen. You're oftentimes going to have like your forward or your center come forward and essentially stand like very close to or right by your point guard. And then they're going to try to make a move around you as their own teammate. And your goal is to literally stand and get in the way of that defender moving on that player. And that's a lot of times where you're going to see like man-to-man switches because that defender can't get around the offensive player to get to the guy who has the ball, or you might see them like really trying to scramble around that.
Yeah.
Correct?
No, absolutely. And really the main goal of that is to kind of free the ball handler to kind of get a extra step on their defender to either kind of open up that path to the basket. And you'll see teams kind of take different approaches on how they defend that depending on the matchup, which players are screening who, and just kind of coaching philosophy in general. I think kind of a main way that that's defended is you'll just have a straight switch. So when kind of that secondary offensive player is going to place a screen on that primary defender, that other defender kind of call it out. And then they'll know to kind of switch.
And they'll get on the ball handler.
And they'll get on the ball handler. And then, switch roles.
So then what is a pick and roll?
Yes. So a pick and roll is kind of after that player makes the screen on the primary defender.
They're in place.
Yes. Instead of just kind of standing there and kind of maybe standing at the top of the key, once that ball carrier kind of gets around the screen, that offensive player will kind of then roll to the basket, trying to get those two defenders kind of in a bad spot.
Interesting. Like almost trying to keep them both behind. So this is like specifically maybe if you're trying to get the ball handler to drive to the hoop. And then you're almost trying to get in the way.
Kind of getting like a 2-on-1 situation.
I have something to admit.
Okay.
My whole life, I thought a pick and roll was literally just the pick, the secondary offensive player who does not have the ball coming and standing somewhere. And then I thought the roll was the ball handler just like rolling around them. But I didn't realize that the pick and roll is all the secondary offensive player essentially continuing. They're essentially playing defense on offense.
Right.
You're trying to get in the way of the defender to clear open the path to the hoop for your...
Yeah.
Is that bad that I never knew that?
No, we learned something.
I love this.
Yeah. So to go with that, another philosophy on how to kind of defend the pick from on defense is for that secondary defender, instead of full on switching, it's called a hedge. So instead of completely taking the ball handler as now your man, you're kind of stepping out in front of that ball handler, kind of making him go around two players now to kind of give that primary defender time to get back.
Yeah.
But when you do that, you kind of have two guys
partially
on one
undefended
offensive player. So that's really when you'll see a lot of times that guy setting the screen roll to the basket before that guy setting the hedge can kind of recover to get an easy basket for the offense.
Interesting. So there's really like so many different options that it can open up depending on the quickness of the defenders and I think even the other team's philosophy. So that's probably something that a lot of times when they're prepping for games, they're watching how the defense of the team that they're about to play does against those
how they defend the screen.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really
and that's why having a guy like Jeremy Fears is so important, because he can kind of read those situations so well. And because sometimes
and having a center that's not tripping over their own feet all the time
and catching the ball, exactly.
all the things.
But Jeremy Fears is able to read that situation, because sometimes defenses, they might switch it up how they defend that. And if Jeremy is able to kind of read that quickly, he's able to make the correct play and hopefully get an easy basket.
It's just wild to think like how many snap decisions, and I know so much of it is just like drilled instinct at that point, but just these players are making on the court, and I think it makes what Jeremy does just even more impressive. And all of our guards, I mean really a lot of different guys running at the point there.
One more thing I think is important to understand with the screen is a lot of times you'll have an illegal screen or a moving screen foul called on the offense.
Are those the same thing?
Yeah, essentially those are the same
illegal
things
screen, moving
as
screen,
well. They kind of might manifest itself a little bit differently, like why they use moving or illegal. But primarily to avoid those foul calls, the offensive player setting the screen, they have to be set by the time that contact is made with the defender.
So you can't be moving into the defender.
And they can't initiate contact.
Okay.
It really has to be that defender.
I am occupying the cylinder that I am in.
Exactly. And then they kind of occupy the offensive player's cylinder.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll see an offensive or foul call on the defense because they kind of push through the offensive player because they're the ones initiating kind of that excessive contact that we talked about in that previous episode.
Definitely. If you get confused by cylinder rules, what we're talking about, I should know and give you the episode number for this. I want to say it was like 5 or 6 episodes ago,
Probably
but you should go back. I'm pretty sure it's in the name of the podcast episode.
I do.
But we have an awesome, honestly, I think one of like my favorite We Got It Covered segments, just as far as like just how helpful it was to understand. Especially, I think, as we enter Big Ten play, there's a lot of frustration with Big Ten refs. Big Ten play is very physical, and I feel like depending on the set of refs you get, one game is called wildly different than another game. And I think it did help give a little bit more clarity of like why there have been so many fouls being called, especially in recent seasons, because they've been really cracking down on the cylinder rule.
So with this screen, if that offensive player isn't set or they initiate contact, that's probably when you're going to hear it called a moving screen because the offensive player is still moving. Yeah. With maybe what you call an illegal screen is another factor for the offensive player setting that screen is they have to be straight up. They have to be solid. They cannot be, a lot of times you'll see on a screen where that offensive player kind of maybe leans or kind of maybe sticks an elbow out or a knee out because maybe they didn't set a very good screen. And that's maybe we're going to see that illegal screen called. So not only do you have to be planted and have the defender initiate that contact, you have to be straight up. You cannot be leaning one way or the other, kind of forcing additional excess contact.
Yes, that makes total sense. Okay, I love that. So it really is, in a sense, an interchangeable term. So don't get hung up on the moving screen versus the illegal screen. There is a little bit of nuance as far as like if whole body is moving, maybe we call that more of like a moving screen and that's what you're going to get called for. If it's a little bit more of a lean action where you're being a little petty and
shoulder, elbow kind of out,
not having those hands really down in front of you, keeping that body upright, that's when you're going to get that illegal screen. I love it. I feel like there's just so many little things when it comes to sports. And how many of us, maybe this is just me, maybe this is just a me issue, but how many of us have like gone through with these terms like I have for a long time of like thinking that a term is one thing when it's maybe actually a little bit different. Yeah. So maybe you're like me and thought a pick and roll was not what it actually is. And if so, welcome. We are so glad you're here, and this is why we do this. If you think that I'm an idiot for not knowing what a pick and roll is, you know what? We're glad you're here too. Thanks for listening. We will take all the engagement.
Well, that probably does it for today's episode. We had a lot of content to go over today. 2 wins in basketball, a lot of athletic coverage in our halftime segment, and hopefully a helpful We Got It Covered segment as well, helping you better understand screens, picks, illegal screens, all moving picks, whatever you want to call it.
Maybe this will be like a little series for the next couple of weeks where we like find some weird basketball terms or calls and just dig into them a little bit more. So stay tuned for more.
Absolutely. So keep on tuning in. As always, like, follow, subscribe on all our platforms, social media, streaming platforms. Helps us grow, helps us get this content out to more Spartan fans and beyond. But as always, go green.
Go white. Go state. And go Lions.
I love it.